So in China, there are areas where the Muslim population concentrate on a entire area, the size of a province that is primarily in the western Xinjiang province, where the Muslim ethnic populations concentrate and include the Uyghur, also include some other ethnic groups. For example, there are Kazakh, Uzbeki, and Kyrgyz, those population that had historical connection with Central Asia, living in the Xinjiang province, and their architecture share the same tradition with the Central Asian country like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, etc. But there are also Muslim living in China proper among other ethnic groups, among the Han, the majority of the Chinese population. And they adopted the Chinese architectural tradition, building their mosque using wooden structure, using glazed tile, sloping roofs, and brackets. And this is also the case in their interior. So I think you shouldn't have any problem recognizing which one is from Xinjiang province and which one is from China proper. In this case, it is from Shanghai, the metropolitan by the Yangtze River, right? So this is the interior. You can see the South Gate Mosque in the city of Urumqi in Xinjiang province. Is very different from the interior of the Songjiang Mosque in Shanghai. The Shanghai Mosque, excuse me, use timber frame, sloping roofs, and you can see very clearly the structural system, structural logic, pretty much like the Buddhist monastery we looked at on Friday. Columns, beams, purlin, and rafter. While the Xinjiang Mosque use tiles, creating abstract patterns and and using arches, columns that is very similar to those found in Central Asia. But in both cases, we are looking at the Chibala Wall, right? So that's something we will look at a lot. Well, Islamic architecture adopt local tradition, but there are some key elements that differentiate a mosque from other religious buildings. Islam as a religion is very kind of pilgrimage oriented. All right, so its architecture, its orientation does not follow cardinal direction and does not even follow the natural topography. So a mosque must be oriented toward the holy pilgrimage site of Mecca in Saudi Arabia today, right? So that means for mosques in China, their orientation is east-west because Mecca is located to the west of China. So all the mosques in China need to have a wall, and that wall is called the Chibala Wall. And the Chibala Wall means that wall is located on the direction of Mecca. So inside the mosque, when you see that wall, when you are facing the Chibala Wall, you are facing the direction of Mecca. And that is required for the Friday prayer. So Muslims gathered in the mosque and they need to pray toward the direction of Mecca. And how do they know which direction they are facing Mecca? And that is the Chibala Wall, right? So the Chibala Wall is the most decorated wall in the interior, most elaborately decorated, the most expensive material, most complicated, most artistically sophisticated ornamentation are applied to the Chibala Wall. And there are also two special treatment in that wall that are also required for all mosques. One is called the mihrab. The mihrab is a niche, an empty niche that is also highly decorated. And that is one of the major indicator of the Chibala Wall or Chibala direction. And that is also usually located in the center of the room. And the most important person present around the mihrab. And for the prayers near that, they were also often of higher status, more kind of respected elders in the community. So that's a Chibala Wall in Xinjiang province. And that is the Chibala Wall with mihrab, also an arch, although in this case, the arch is not structural, it is just a decoration. That's the mihrab. Another element is called mimbar. Mimbar. The mimbar is an elevated seat, often accessed through a flight of steps. So here we have a mimbar in Xinjiang province, and there we have a mimbar constructed purely in wood in Shanghai, right? You have the steps, an elevated seat. And that mimbar Today in a mosque, it is purely of kind of ornamentation value and a indicator of the Chibala direction. It's not meant to be seated, and originally it was a seat for the Prophet Muhammad. So it became a symbol. Both of them are required. So no matter where the mosque is constructed, no matter whether it's surrounded by, Christians or Confucians or Taoists, the mosque for Muslim, no matter which architectural tradition they adopt, they need to differentiate a Chibala wall in the interior from a common wall. And the indicators are the mihrab and the minbar. It is interesting to observe, for example, I want to point this out. There's a little tablet in the Shanghai mosque, and a tablet with Chinese characters written on it. And that is usually in a Chinese Confucian society used for ancestor worship. The name of deceased ancestor are written on a tablet, lined on a desk at a family in a family shrine on an altar to be worshipped. And in this case, the names inscribed on the tablet is the title, the Chinese translation of God Allah. So some form of Confucian worship were adopted, but at the same time substituted with the Islamic content. And in the Shanghai Mosque, another Chinese tradition for important sacred space were also adopted. That is the couplet written on a board, frame the central axis symmetrically. So there we have the Chinese inscription praising the religion of Islam and praising Allah and praising Prophet Muhammad. And those were written in Chinese characters. But then in the very center, we have the Arabic writing, Arabic inscription in the middle. So Islamic architecture in China proper combined the two traditions. Technically and in terms of material, mosque use the Chinese tradition. It also adopted some Chinese convention in terms of sacred space and worship, but it was adopted for the entirely different religious background from which that architectural tradition was growing up. Now let's first take a look at a few examples from Xinjiang province, the central kind of the Chinese Islamic architecture belonging to the Central Asian tradition. And this is a mosque for the Uyghur in the city of Kashgar in Xinjiang province, called the Idaho Mosque. So here we have the arrow for north, right? The building is oriented along a east-west axis, right? The main prayer hall, located on the western side of the courtyard, and the courtyard defined by a wall and rooms was irregular in shape, following the restriction of the urban area. This is in the city. The prayer hall is elevated on a platform to a higher position. That is also a way to elevate the sacred ground from the rest. The entrance to the courtyard is on the east side, not right in the center, a little bit offside, on the south end of the eastern wall, and on the opposite side of the Chibala direction, so that when the prayers enter the gate, they are already kind of facing the direction of Mecca. So during the entire procedure, they are facing the Chibala direction, the direction of Mecca, right? So as soon as they enter the area, the gate was opened in a way for them to be oriented toward that pilgrimage direction. From outside, a major indicator of mosque is the minaret, right? The minaret, the tower, used to be the place where calling for prayers were, shout out, but today they were mostly replaced by loudspeakers. However, the architectural type survived, and in the Central Asian tradition, as well as in the Xinjiang tradition, that minarets were usually combined with the gate, right? So it's on the gate, there are minarets. Another element in the courtyard for Islamic architecture is the fountain for ablution. So the Muslim need to purify themselves, washing their hand, face before the entrance to the prayer hall. And as a result, water body or a pavilion for a fountain pavilion is also very common for mosque. And in this case, we have 2 ponds connected with a water body, which is kind of unique and interesting. And those are the areas for ablution. The mihrab and mimbar can also be observed on the plan. So that is the mihrab, the alcove on the Chibala wall. And in this case, it is a niche with an arch, but also recessed from the Chibala wall to create a real kind of spatial definition for the mihrab. And the gate, right? This is the entrance to the courtyard. The Idaho Mosque in Kashgar pretty much follow the Persian tradition in Iran, in the combination of a arch with a screen wall. And that combination of a rectangular screen wall with a arch to define the entrance to a space, whether it is courtyard or the prayer hall, they use the same monumental entrance. And that is called the Iwan. This combination of wall and arch to define an entrance called Iwan in the Iranian Islamic tradition. And the Uyghur mosque was built pretty much in the same tradition. And the minarets appeared in a pair. And again, originally those were the places for the prayer to be announced, calling for prayer to be announced. But now they are kind of purely decorative and often equipped with loudspeaker. Domes were also very, very common in the Xinjiang Islamic architecture. So there's a dome behind the Iwan. And the prayer hall, on the other hand, is just using pure timber roof, a flat roof. But the gate was highlighted with a dome in this case. This is the entrance to the prayer hall, right, of Idaho Mosque, an elevated ground. And the entrance to the prayer hall is also highlighted by an arch. And again, this entrance, if you are in the courtyard facing the entrance to the prayer hall, you are also facing the Chibala direction. To some extent, be aware that during festivals, during major religious day, the entire, the courtyard might also be filled with prayers. And in that case, the entrance wall to the prayer hall became the Chibala Wall for the courtyard. So in that case, the entrance to the prayer hall is almost like the mihrab. And indeed, it is in the same kind of decoration as the mihrab in the interior. So that is indicating the Chibala direction for prayers in the courtyard. The roof are pure timber roof and porcelain lintel system with the flat form and a ceiling decoration. A detail of the entrance to the prayer hall. A restriction in Islamic architectural decoration is the prevention of using figurative decoration, right? So in Islam, creating life is considered a privilege of God, Allah. So in sacred architecture, human, figurative decoration are not allowed, being it human figure or animal figure, better not to have. So as a result, in Islamic architecture, the creative energy were all kind of channeled toward the invention of abstract patterns based on floral, vegetal, geometric motifs, and something known as arabesque. So that is arabesque, right? It's abstract, it's very complicated, but not figurative. And that is common feature for all Islamic architecture. The interior of the prayer hall is rather simplistic, right? So it's indeed the only difference from the courtyard space is that the prayer hall is elevated and under a roof, so prayers could be sheltered from the weather. But other than that, in the case of Apoca Mosque, it is not very much embellished, and the entire Chibala Wall is also quite simplistic, except for the mihrab, the area around the mihrab and the minbar. Ceilings were decorated also with abstract motif, but in this case, some of the tradition from the Chinese sphere were also adopted in each of those small squares. The flowers and the sceneries that could be found in other Chinese wooden frame painting can also be found here in the ceiling painting of the Idaho Mosque. Now let's take a look at another Uyghur mosque example. And this is the Apoca Hoja Mosque. Apoca Hoja Mosque was a mosque that is combined with funeral function, right? So it was constructed primarily as a kind of accompanying mosque for the tomb of a local prince. So located in the middle of the mosque area is a monumental tomb. So that is a tomb. And the major mosque is located on the western area of the complex, which is of course ideal because that is the Chibala direction, right? So, so in Chinese Islamic architecture, the most important prayer hall, most important building is located on the west side. So that one has to approach it from the east. And when you do that, you are facing the direction of Mecca, which is on the west of China. There are a few smaller mosques for more private prayers. There's one here, another is here. There is also a Islamic college, Islamic school for education called Madrasa, and that is here, right? So here we find a complex in the Uyghur tradition, combination of mosque, madrasa, and a tomb, funeral function, educational function, and worshiping function. These are the three major tasks a mosque shoulders in the Islamic world. And traditionally, for Muslim country, all educations were carried out in a mosque context. It is through the study of Quran, study of Holy Quran, that one gets to be literate. So the Eastern funeral area include a major tomb, but also a large cemetery where other Muslim members for later generation were, buried in this area. This one is from the, built first in the 17th century, and the life tradition continued through the 19th century. And this is the a drawing for the aerial view of the Apoca Hoja Mosque. This is the tomb, and those smaller smaller tomb surrounding the main princely mausoleum. And this is the major prayer hall. A smaller, more private, and also kind of more aristocratic mosque for the elite. And that is the madrasa, the Islamic school, featuring a courtyard of its own for a more quiet environment, and those teaching rooms on the four sides. And of course, water surfaces for ablution, and it's also located at different location. The building, which is very typical for Xinjiang province, combined a load-bearing wall with a flat timber roof. So this is very common for Uyghur mosques. So the walls are masonry using arch and solid walls, but the ceilings are usually timber roof using rafters supported by the load-bearing wall, as well as columns inside the prayer hall. Mat spread on the floor for prayer. And again, except for the Chibala Wall, which is along this side, the rest of the interior is quite simplistic, rather barely, differentiated from the exterior space. So the entrance to the prayer hall, right, and a minaret. So here the columns are constructed also using the Iranian type, featuring quite complicated capital and ornately carved into abstract patterns and supporting a wooden flat roof. And the walls are also covered with glazed tiles, a tradition also practiced in Iran and other Central Asian countries. So get a closer view of these columns. The shaft of the columns were divided into horizontal sections, and each with a different kind of shape and a decorative motif. And the capital is highlighted with small kind of niche-like feature which is, a three-dimensional pattern. I mentioned that with figurative decoration not allowed in architecture, creation focus on patterns, and there are two-dimensional patterns, but also three-dimensional patterns like what we are looking at in these capitals. The ceiling again, combined a sense of geometry and abstraction, but in this case, it's also combined with the flower painting and sometimes landscape painting in each of those small frames. And that is borrowed from the Chinese tradition for architectural wooden frame painting. And get a closer look at the capital as well. Very colorfully decorated. The patterns, again, in this case, goes beyond the two-dimensional surface, but to incorporate an entire three-dimensional shape. The interior, looking at the Chibala Wall, right? So that's the Chibala direction. And here we have the mihrab, and that wall is differentiated from other walls in terms of its color, right? More colorfully painted, and with the most elegant decoration in both 2D and 3D. This is a small kind of elite mosque in the complex, which features a dome. And in this kind of smaller prayer hall, a dome constructed on top of the prayer hall. And this dome is also covered with the glazed tiles. And the interior of the dome, which is, again, representing the Chinese version of a very common Islamic architectural tradition. And that is the Mukharnas. All right, Mukharnas, what is a Mukharnas? Mukharnas is a architectural element in Islamic architecture that is in the form of a honeycomb-like form. It features a series of vault that were arranged into a pattern that create a complicated abstract pattern in 3D. Originally, it came from the bridging of a square into a circle, right? So in Islamic architecture, the plan is often square. However, if you wanted to put a dome to be supported by a square plan, what do you do? In the Islamic tradition, what they do is often first to bridge the corner of the square into a octagon. And on that octagon, you can put the drum for the circular domical ceiling, right? So, and that bridge, that diagonal wall needs to be supported, and that is usually supported by a half dome. And that sometimes on top of the octagon, the octagon can be further bridged into a 16-sided polygon that is even closer to a circle. And in that case, you further bridge those corners of the octagon, and you got more shorter and smaller, but more bridges. And those bridges need to be supported underneath by even smaller niches. So if you repeat that process, the polygon became closer and closer to a true circle. At the same time, there are smaller and smaller supporting arches for those diagonal element. And that is precisely what you are looking at here, right? So the ground floor is a square. So here we are looking at the square is being bridged into an octagon. And that diagonal is being supported by an arch. And further, that octagon is being further bridged into a 6-sided polygon, and you put more diagonals, more bridges, and each of those will also feature an arch. And eventually, when that polygon became 32-sided, it is in the architectural scale, it is basically equals a circle. Now you can comfortably put a dome on top of it, right? So that Mukharnas, the structural logic of Mukharnas came from that structural need to transfer from a square into a circle. However, in later Islamic architecture, it became almost a pure decoration, right? A pure decorative motif. And indeed, for those upper levels, there was virtually no need to make further transition, right? So those are almost purely decorative, even though they pretty much follow the structural logic of those lower layers in larger scale. To some extent, excuse me, this 3-dimensional decoration in the capital is basically also a Mukharnas, right? If you look at that, it's basically small arches, pretty much like that. So it eventually became a decorative motif without much structural function anymore. It is known as Mukharnas, right, which is very common in Central Asia, and it's also very common in Xinjiang province, China. Well, the last example we will look at from the Xinjiang province is this, this Emin Mosque. The Emin Mosque was a memorial mosque dedicated to a local chieftain who, worked with the Manchu government in Beijing during the Qing dynasty to quell a local Muslim uprising. So after the area was pacified, Emperor Qianlong of the 18th century honored Emin, the local leader, Muslim leader, a monument in the form of a mosque. But this mosque, its greatest feature is not the prayer hall, but the minaret. And in this case, the minaret is really a monument. That's the major, most complicated, most artistically elegant part of the entire mosque. That is the kind of difference between a memorial mosque from a common urban mosque built originally for prayer. That is the mosque. All right, compared to the minaret, the mosque is not as sophisticated. So the minaret is really the kind of the main character for the whole complex. The minaret is on the same direction of the entrance. So this is the main entrance to the courtyard. Entering the courtyard, one is facing the Chibala direction, and on the other side, on the other end is the prayer hall in flat roof. Right, that prayer hall, again, both the gate and the prayer hall seems second grade in comparison to the minaret. So let's take a closer look at the minaret. The minaret, following the Islamic tradition, not using any figurative decoration, it just create those abstract patterns. And in this case, all those patterns are created by manipulating the simple material of bricks. So this is a brick tower, and all those patterns were just, created by lining the bricks kind of in different angle, and some of them are more protruding, others recessing, and it created a kind of a three-dimensional pattern on the surface of this minaret. And some time-honored Islamic motif like the rondel that looks quite similar to the rose window in the Mediterranean region that was used in both Islamic architecture as well as Christian architecture, churches. And it's also appeared here. The entrance to the courtyard, this is the prayer hall, right? The prayer hall is rather simplistic. As I mentioned, this mosque, its main character is the monument honoring the local Muslim leader, and the prayer hall was a kind of accompanying secondary function for the Muslim community. But still, the Chibala Wall needed to be highlighted. So once entering this space, you should be able to tell that is the direction of Mecca, because there's a mihrab, right, in the shape of a niche. And there is also a minbar, 3 steps, very humble, 3 steps, but these are required for any prayer spaces in any Islamic architecture.